I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Aaron Smith was appointed Associate Athletic Director and Senior Women's Administrator in 2019. Katie oversees UW's Compliance Office and is Deputy Title IX Coordinator. In addition, Katie serves as Sport Administrator for Women's Volleyball, won a national championship this year, and co-sport administrator for football. Prior to her appointment, Katie spent 21 years in UW's compliance office and also 5 years at Northern Illinois University in compliance-related roles. Katie is a member of the Women's Leaders in College Sports and National Association for Athletics Compliance, for which she has served on the board of directors until 2018 and chaired the education committee. Katie is originally from Danville, Illinois, and currently lives in Verona with her two sons, Quinn and Cody. Please welcome Katie Aaron Smith.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and Dan for arranging this. I want to start off on behalf of UW Athletics, thanking all of you, both here in person and on Zoom, for all of the service and the great community building that you all do. That is definitely a focus of our new athletic director, Chris McIntosh, has really tried to emphasize to our staff the importance of volunteering and doing what's right by our community and taking our time to do that. And so really appreciate all that all of you do. It is an exciting time in college athletics. If I would have known about the happy dollars, I should have brought a few with, as Dan mentioned, volleyball winning the national title, its first in program history, was really just an incredible experience with a group of women that just were tough competitors and just never let up. You know, we were in the finals 3 times in the last, 3 years. And so I'm glad that they were able, especially for our seniors, to be able to take away that national title and hope for many more. I also traveled with our football team to Vegas for the Las Vegas Bowl and came back with a victory from there. And obviously many of our sports are doing great things right now and will be into our seasons. And I learned today that we have a former women's rower here. So definitely want to applaud her. We have a terrific rowing program, and I'm sure it's due to the support of its student athletes and former students really putting in the time. That it's not an easy sport, doing the morning practices on the water, and we were talking about facility renovations you go through, but it really is a stellar program in our athletic department. So on that. In terms of the topic that I was asked to speak about today is name, image, and likeness. And there are a lot of changes going on in our world that whether it's lawsuits that are coming forth that are addressing issues like pay for play, or students' ability to use their name, image, and likeness in order to receive compensation. And I will tell you this, that as a compliance person, I had to spend many years answering our student athletes questions about, can I own my own business, Katie? I'm a hunter. I want to, have my own hunting business. Yes, you can, but you can't use your name to promote it or your status as an athlete to promote it. And I certainly never liked giving those answers to those questions because it didn't seem to make a lot of sense and be student athlete friendly. So I can't say enough how much I am so thrilled that there are changes coming forth in the NCAA. As Coach Alvarez always said to all of us, our former athletic director, we need to embrace change. And I think that's a message that we're all taking to heart to increase the opportunities for our student athletes, including name, image, and likeness. So how did we get here with name, image, and likeness? It started with some adoption of legislation in different states. California was the first one to adopt legislation in September of 19 to become effective in 2023, but it was Florida's legislation that put the NCAA on a clock. They put forth legislation in June of 20 that was going to become effective in July of 21, July 1st. And so that means that we couldn't have state legislation going to effect in one state and not give the ability to all of our student athletes across the country. Otherwise, you know, you can imagine the recruiting efforts in Florida. Hey, you can take advantage of this here. Come to our state. So the NCAA had to move fairly quickly. And so on June 30th of 2021, the NCAA adopted temporary rules. So we were waiting on some more permanent rules or federal legislation to come through. But on June 30th, right before the July 1 effective date, the NCAA came up with temporary rules. And all that's at play here in terms of the rules is you cannot use name, image, and likeness in recruiting inducements. Yes, you can laugh with all the things that you're reading. I'm really saying that. That is part of the rule. It cannot include pay for play. So student athletes still couldn't receive pay just for winning a contest. There has to actually be some sort of name, image, and likeness activity. And they have to be compensated at the fair market value. That is one that I know I share with our student athletes, that they're really establishing the fair market value right now. There hasn't been it before because we haven't allowed name, image, and likeness before. So that's certainly one that's tough to really put a number on or a gauge on, because they are setting that right now. So I mentioned some states that put in name, image, and likeness legislation. The state of Wisconsin does not have legislation. And we see that as actually a positive. Coach Alvarez and our current athletic director, Chris McIntosh, worked a lot with state legislators and came to the point of, we felt it was advantageous for us to be able to develop our own policy rather than have state legislation that might inadvertently cause some opportunities from our student athletes to be denied. And so we were able to come up with that policy literally in a few days' time, given the NCAA changed course a bit on their temporary rules. And so we adopted a policy that we feel is very flexible to our student athletes, have educated them on that, their agents and different entities on that, to try to put in some protective guardrails for them, but at the same time allow them to take advantage of this new rule. So what we're doing specifically at UW is we partnered with a third-party company called Open Doors. And there are a variety of these companies that schools have entered into agreements with, but it was to bring in experts on this field to be able to present to our student athletes. So near the July 1 effective date, or on July 1, people from Open Doors came in, presented to our student athletes who happened to be on campus, as well as did Zoom calls, virtual meetings with our student athletes who were not, to try to give them the ins and outs of how they could utilize name, image, and likeness, including through their website. We also had units within athletics that formed a task force to try to plan for this. And we did that, a year at least in advance, to try to figure out how we could use our entities within athletics, such as brand communications, career and leadership. We have a very dedicated career and leadership staff that can help our student athletes. Compliance is a piece of that. So that, as Dan mentioned, I oversee our compliance office. And so there are pieces of that fall under that office as well, but really focus on how we could best support our student athletes. And it's really difficult to try to imagine how we usually operate in supporting our student athletes completely, sending them resources, trying to help guide them through different rules and regulations. In this one, because of the rules of the NCAA, we can't be directly involved in giving them legal advice or tax advice. We can't arrange deals for them as the athletic department because of various things in terms of pay for play, also Title IX regulations that we have to meet. And so it's been one of those where we've tried to find resources for our student athletes, not necessarily only within athletics, but outside of athletics, to be able to help make sure that they're the best informed that they can be. So in terms of legal advice, we partnered with the UW Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic on campus. And that is one that I'm proud to say J.J. Watt used when he was here to start his foundation. He actually started it when he was a college student athlete here at UW. We couldn't give him legal advice, but he partnered with them to be able to establish his foundation, which has done, some really incredible things. We also partnered with the Wisconsin Business Development Center on campus to be able to have a resource for all of our student athletes, same as all students, about how to consult on business topics, building their own business, brand management, all kinds of different pieces that clinic could help with. And then our Office of Student Financial Services, one of the pieces that we wanted to make sure was not an inadvertent consequence to our student athletes was the ability for them to receive NIL income without impacting their financial aid. So it doesn't impact their athletic scholarships at all, but say there's a student that qualifies for a Pell Grant based on their need, and then they start engaging in name, image, and likeness activities. When they go to fill out their federal financial aid form for the next year, they may have to include that income in terms of deciding whether or not they can have a Pell Grant for the next year. So again, it's just giving our student athletes as much information as possible. One major change in the NCAA was to allow student athletes to actually sign with agents for purposes of name, image, and likeness. So typically, agents are not allowed when it comes to their being here, being a current student athlete or whatever institution it is, and helping them with their professional sports pursuits. But in terms of name, image, and likeness, they can use agents to be able to help them with that, which I think is really key, again, to them having as many resources and information as possible. I also like to speak about what keeps me up at night in terms of name, image, and likeness. I get a lot of emails and phone calls from people, whether it be in the community or colleagues of mine, saying, wow, there's a lot going on. How do you possibly, keep track of all of this or manage all of this? I think my biggest concern is student athletes getting taken advantage of or rushing into deals. When July 1 hit, it was almost like playing a video game where, students jumped on to whatever first deal they could possibly, to be able to say, I just did name, image, and likeness. I think one student athlete said to me, it literally was like playing a video game. It was something that was fun to do. And that's great, unless they're signing on to give their rights away, their image away for a long period of time. You don't want them to sign a deal now with, say, a video gaming company that maybe is more like a local or a mom and pop video game, when EA Sports may be waiting down the road for them to be part of Madden, the very popular video game. So just trying to make sure that our student athletes understand when they're looking at these to really think about it. Don't rush into a deal. Make sure the deal aligns with your core values. And I know there are a lot of great examples out there of what our student athletes are doing, commercials that are run through different restaurants and companies that some of our student athletes are doing, which are really good practices, but just want to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of. And then in terms of what's next, right now we're continuing to evaluate what's going on in the market. And so, what are other schools doing? Or what are other student athletes doing that our student athletes could take advantage of here? And so we're constantly evolving our policy and our practices to try to be able to keep up without, again, sacrificing what we do or what we mean in terms of being a badger and doing what's best for the student athlete. We are still awaiting potential long-term legislation, whether it's federal or from the NCAA, to try to manage, again, a lot of stories you read about schools potentially using it in recruiting or things that could be considered pay for play. And the NCAA is saying they're looking into those things, but are they going to be effective in terms of having any sort of enforcement of their policies? And as I mentioned before, Title IX is definitely a consideration here. I can say just in general, while I can't speak specifically about any student athletes, I think in general here you can imagine that the high profile nature of many of our women's sports has allowed them opportunities to partake in name, image, and likeness in the same manner as male student athletes. And so I feel really good about where it sits here at UW, especially when you have a volleyball team that just came from a national title. Women's hockey seems to win it every single year. So, you know, it's really a good place to be able to have those Title IX considerations be met. Then in conclusion, you know, it's really just a new world. It's constantly changing. Every day, something new comes along. And so we just have to be willing to evolve and be nimble in our approach, and just be part of this journey with our student athletes. And again, there's pieces of this that we can help them with and pieces we can't, but in general, just trying to get them their best resources to make the best decisions for them possible is where we're at. So I'm happy. I'm sure there's going to be questions. I was already warned in advance, so feel free to ask questions.
We talked about this briefly before the meeting. In terms of competitive balance and parity, what, if anything, under the current legislation can be done in a situation, you know, there are some schools that have really fanatical and deep-pocketed boosters. Alabama, LSU, Southern Cal, every school in the Southwest Conference. What is to prevent, for example, an Alabama booster who owns 5 car dealerships in Alabama, who knows that Nick Saban is after a 5-star high school quarterback recruit? What's to prevent that booster from either overtly or covertly going to that kid and saying, hey, if you come to Alabama, I'll pay you $100,000 a year to do TV commercials for my dealership? Or what's to prevent him from telling Nick Saban that? Or what's to prevent him from telling the student's agent that?
Right. Great question. That's why when I put forth that the NCAA rule prohibits it being used in recruiting, you know, feel free to insert laugh, because obviously that you're reading about that a lot of times. And again, while I can't speak to what's going on at Alabama, I'll just speak in general in terms of that. That is part of the rules, that they are not, meaning anyone is not supposed to be using this as a recruiting inducement for a student athlete to go to an institution. And it goes back to what's going to be the enforcement of this, because you may have read that there are some institutions that have put forth programs that the NCAA is questioning, but what is the answer going to be? We're still waiting. We've been waiting months. This went into effect July 1 with different questions coming up about what this school is doing or that school is doing. There's yet to be any formal answer as to what's going to happen to anybody that may not follow that prohibition. So it's a little bit of the wild, wild west right now, to be honest. And so you just try your best to give the most opportunities to our student athletes without potentially crossing the line. But it is a bit of a unsure time as to what's going to happen to anybody that crosses the lines. It's a fair question.
How widespread is it that you've seen? I'm not sure. Do the student athletes have the first part? Do they have to report to you when they do have some kind of a contract?
We ask our student athletes to disclose their activities. It's not necessarily prior approval. It's to their advantage. We encourage them for prior approval because, for example, they're able to avoid, if we can see it prior to any sort of violations of our policy, we can address those, as well as any compliance concerns. So as an example of maybe where a student athlete has come to us, or many student athletes have come to us, it's more, say it's competing sponsors. So we have an apparel contract, with Under Armour, and a student athlete wants to enter into a deal with some other apparel company. The answer is not necessarily no, that they can't, but what they can do during team activities and what they can't are two different things. And so in terms of their ability to do that, there's a lot of nuances there to work through with them. Okay, at this time, you can do that and advertise that, but you can't wear, say, your uniform when you're in that commercial. But say it is a sponsor of ours, that you're able to wear your uniform or our logos in it, if it's Under Armour or some other vendor of ours. And so I would say that that's a frequent one that comes up. We have actually an email set up, NIL questions at athletics.wis.edu for student athletes. And that is really the central hub for all student athletes to be able to ask questions. We have staff that work specifically with sports. For example, I might get a lot of questions from our football and volleyball players and or student athletes, and our other sport administrators might get the same. We have compliance staff that are assigned to sports. And so there's a lot of touch points that aren't necessarily through just the normal disclosure process through Open Doors where they might submit a deal. It's all these other interactions that I think help shape how they approach NIL.
So the follow-up to that is then if you know how many, if they're reporting to you, how widespread is it amongst all the sports? Is it, I mean, are you seeing it in a lot of different sports and a lot of athletes? I mean, are we talking hundreds of athletes that are?
That's a good question. I probably should have, I could have brought general data in here, but I would say it's across all sports. And I think the point that gets lost in the high profile student athlete obviously has a great social media following and maybe their name, image, and likeness through social media posts versus I've had student athletes come to me for the last 24 years saying, again, I'm an artist. I want to sell my paintings. This gives them the opportunity to set up their own business to sell their paintings and use their status as a student. One of the great pieces of our policy is we actually allow our student athletes to identify themselves. I am a Wisconsin Badger, insert sport. Student athletes, some states' policies or schools' policies don't allow that. And so they're able to use, without using our trademarks or logos, they're able to use their status as an athlete to be able to promote their business. And so I think it's just keeping in mind all those different ranges of opportunities from the ones that you read about, the really high profile, to the ones that may serve all of our student athletes.
We have a question on Zoom. Lynn Perez, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm thinking there's going to be a cross recruitment opportunity. Frequently, student athletes are brought to a campus and they're shown the athletic facility, of course. Now they're going to be shown the business school and the entrepreneurship program and the public relations program. And yes, conversely, the business students are going to be brought in saying, you want to get in on the ground floor, here you are.
Lynn, I agree. When we approach the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic, which are students studying to be attorneys that are overseen by a faculty member, they were so excited, and they still are. And I think that goes a long way to have our student athletes be supported by a group if they choose. I mean, they're not restricted to that. If they want to go seek outside counsel or whatever have you, they can do that. But in terms of a free resource where our student athletes in the law school are gaining experience under the supervision of a stellar faculty and helping our student athletes navigate this is huge. So I appreciate your recognizing that.
Well, when I lived in Tucson for 30 years and we followed the University of Arizona, the Wildcats. Well, one of the guys who was on the team with Steve Kerr, yes, guess what? He's a sports attorney and now a commentator.
George Silverwood has a question.
Well, I think most of us are aware of a high-profile quarterback and a basketball player who advertises for restaurants. What are some of the other, not necessarily without naming names, what are some of the other entrepreneurial ideas that people are actually doing?
Oh boy, that's a really good question. Again, the artist is a big one for one of our student athletes. I believe there was a newspaper article about that, and she's not the first one that I've had conversations with about being able to really capitalize on this for the selling of their art. trying to think of other things that we have seen. A lot of it is social media posted, you know, advertising for whether it's a video game company or apparel is popular. You probably have read a couple of our student athletes entered into agreements with Degree deodorant that also they've taken advantage of. Now those are probably the best examples I can think of. If I come up with more in my head, there's many that our student athletes have done that I'm sure I'm just forgetting to mention, given the widespread nature of NIL.
Okay.
Another Zoomer, Lori Schwartz.
I was just wondering, do you see this possibly helping, or how it could possibly help under-resourced youth who might not otherwise have funds at a high school level? Not the high profile, but I guess the less high profile.
So it's a good question. I think in terms of high school rules, they all default to the state high school associations. So if we're talking about the state of Wisconsin, I would have to defer to WIA rules in terms of name, image, and likeness. So the NCAA rules would permit, you know, say a prospective student athlete at a high school to be able to utilize this rule, but the WIA might have a different rule. And so unfortunately, that's not an area I have expertise in, but I could see it being advantageous for a student athlete if it was allowed to be able to do. So sorry, I can't answer it more specifically, but that would be covered by the WIA or whatever the state high school association is.
I'm very curious on your take on the market value side. So you've got for example, you've got a national player of the year in volleyball. You've got a potential national player of the year in basketball. You've got a quarterback that may be the biggest recruit that's ever come into the program. How do those compare for market value? Because obviously their level in their sport is outstanding.
Sure.
But are you seeing that one is going to get more than the other?
Again, really good question, and I'm being very careful not to talk about specific student athletes. I don't mind.
And I think in general,
but in general, I really think it varies. I think that if you read, I've read articles where the highest earners might be, a gymnast at an SEC school, or there's twin basketball players at Fresno State University that it was their social media following that they have this value that was already assigned to them, or they already earned. And then name, image, and likeness came on, and they're able to take advantage of that.
Bigger reach.
And so that's where I think it's, obviously we try to educate our student athletes that, of course, the better you do in terms of your athletic status and your academic status, that's only going to help you. But I don't think it's the end all be all either. There's other influencers or different ways that you can have a large social media following without being the star player. You might remember a walk-on at Ohio State for basketball years ago. Like, he had this incredible social media following that even the high-profile players there didn't have. And so I think it's just really hard. It's not a one size fits all, right. but a fair question.
Yeah. It'll be interesting when the stats come out as the program continues to develop.
Yes. And again, it's just a wide range of what students are doing and the sports that are involved. It's really, again, speaking here, it's really been wonderful to see that it's not just one sport, one athlete. They're able to take advantage of it.
Did you get involved with the shoe scandal at all?
Like, if I had $1 for every time that came up in my speaking engagement. So, shoebox was I got here in July of '98, and that happened in 2000. So I was not the head of compliance at the time. I was the assistant. So that was a bit of a rough patch in terms of, but knock on wood, no major infractions since that happened. And I think we all have opinions about whether or not that should have been a major infraction or not. And maybe I'll reserve my comments on that for when I retire. But I think we've gotten past that, which is great.
Somebody asked on Zoom what the cover of Sports Illustrated is worth.
Yeah, really good question. I'd say whatever the agent and the student athlete can negotiate with Sports Illustrated is what it's worth.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question, right? Normally we have a staff that arranges media appearances for our student athletes and interviews with Sports Illustrated and newspapers. Now with name, image, and likeness, will that change in terms of, I don't think it's changed. We still have that, but it's interesting to see if a student athlete, wants to be paid, they'd be on the cover of Sports Illustrated without their uniform on because of the trademark. And so, how would that come across? I don't know. It's a good question.
Do the student athletes have access to contract review as well?
Again, it's up to them to take advantage of that through outside sources. Okay. So okay. I can review their contract, or our compliance office can, for compliance reasons. Okay. So those NCAA rules I stated, those are the only things that we can give them advice on. Otherwise, we're not permitted to give them legal advice. And that's really more of a state issue. It's not even under the NCAA rule per se. So that's why we found it really beneficial to get a free resource on campus to have that we can point them towards, rather than just saying we can't help you. Either you can go have an attorney, which a student athlete that has an agent helping them with these deals will likely have an outside attorney looking at these, which is good. But for those that don't have the same resources or not at the same level, we can send them to the law clinic.
Is there any kind of revenue sharing? I'm thinking that there isn't. In other words, some kid makes $5 million, like 1% of that go to the NCAA. Yeah, I didn't think so.
It does not.
I wouldn't think so, yeah.
Right. Well, the only example I'll give you in terms of, and we're still working through this locally, but you may have read other schools going into deals for jersey sales. So you may have a third party that is organizing, jerseys is one example, but it could be bobbleheads, it could be trading cards. And so again, it's the student athlete's decision whether or not they want to do those things. What our role would be, and what I'm understanding other schools' role would be in that, is giving use of the trademark or the logo permission. And so that would be the only way. It would be a typical, share in terms of what the use of the trademark is versus what the student athlete would get is completely separate.
Okay.
All right. Oh, Lori has one more question, and then
just one more. You answered quite a few of the questions. Thank you. About if you were an attorney, I was curious I'm not trying to create business, but who are going to be the big players in the legal conversations that occur about this in the at least in Madison or around Wisconsin, if you know, because a lot of legal things may come out of this. Just wondering who
I think I understand your question. So number one, I'm not an attorney. I do have a staff member who's an attorney. It's common in compliance to have one, but we have attorneys our attorneys are those that are the ones on campus that work with our athletic department. So we do have some in-house, but we also have utilization of the legal services office on campus. And so in terms of legal issues, I'm not quite sure. Are you talking about in terms of use of trademark? Like what kinds of legal issues are you referring to?
I guess I'm wondering if the interpretation of things in this area, who are there people that are out there doing that currently, that it's that there are debates about what was brought up earlier about people with big money in other areas that might not, who in this area?
For sure. For sure. So again, right now, I mean, it falls under the NCAA umbrella. We abide by NCAA rules as being a member of the NCAA. And so in terms of interpretations, we would seek the advice of the NCAA in terms of whether or not something was permissible or not under their rules. But in terms of specific policy, so our policy here at UW, those interpretations would be a combination of maybe it's our internal attorney within athletics, the attorney on campus. We have a trademark licensing office on campus. It involves a lot of different people that would make policy interpretations, and our compliance office often does too. Good question. All great questions.
All right.